Welcome to the Total Wireless Store, where total confidence awaits.
I need to keep up with my teens this summer without sweating high cell phone bills.
Don't worry, you got this with Total Wireless. We have plans to fit all your family's needs starting at just $25 on the nation's best 4G LTE network.
I won't miss a thing.
Now you can focus on the important stuff, like arguing about curfew.
Discover the Total Wireless stores and get total confidence. The latest phones, the best network, all at great prices. Now open in New York. Refer to the latest terms and conditions of service at totalwireless.com.
Welcome to the Brief History Podcast, the Indian Mutiny. This is part 1. Part 2 will follow shortly. Please check out the podcast notes for further information and links to our social media pages. As always, please like and share and tell your friends. The success of this podcast relies on its listeners. Thank you. This podcast will discuss how the Indian Mutiny of 1857 began of a mutiny of sepoys of the East India Company's army on the 10th of May 1857. It started in the town of Meerut and soon escalated into other mutinies and civilian rebellions, largely in the upper Gangetic plain in central India, with the major hostilities confined to present-day Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, northern Madhya Pradesh and the Delhi region. The rebellion posed a considerable threat to company power in the region and was contained only with the fall of Gwalior on the 20th of June 1858. This rebellion has been known by many names: India's First War of Independence, the Great Rebellion, the Indian Mutiny, the Revolt of 1857, the Uprising 1857 and the Sepoy Rebellion. The mutiny was a result of various grievances. However, flashpoint was reached when the soldiers were asked to bite off paper cartridges for their rifle, which had been greased with animal fat, namely beef and pork. This was and is against the religious beliefs of Hindus and Muslims. Other regions of company-controlled India, such as Bengal, the Bombay Presidency and the Madras Presidency, largely remained calm. In Punjab, the Sikh princes backed the company, providing them soldiers and support. The large princely states of Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore and Kashmir, as well as smaller ones of Rajputana, did not join the rebellion. In some regions, such as Oudh, the rebellion took on the attributes of a patriotic revolt against European presence. Maratha leaders such as Lakshmana, the Rani of Jhansani, became folk heroes in the nationalist movement in India half a century later. However, they themselves generated no coherent ideology for the new order. The rebellion led to the dissolution of the East Indian Company in 1858. It also led to the British to reorganise the army, the financial system and the administration in India. India was therefore directly governed by the Crown as the new British Raj. Although the British East India Company had earlier administrated the factory areas established for trading purposes, its victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked the beginning of its firm foothold in eastern India. The victory was consolidated in 1764 at the Battle of Buxar, when the defeated Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II granted the company the right for a collection of revenue in the provinces of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa known as Diwani. The company expanded its territories around the base in Bombay and Madras. The Anglo-Mysore Wars 1766 to 1799 and the Anglo-Maratha Wars 1772 to 1818 led to the control of the vast region of India south of the Narmada River. In 1806, the Furlong Mutiny was sparked due to new uniform regulations that created resentments amongst both Hindu and Muslim sepoys. After the turn of the 19th century, Governor-General Wesley began what became 2 decades of accelerated expansion of company territories. This was achieved either by subsidiary alliances between the company and the local rulers or by direct military annexation. The subsidiary alliances created the princely states or native states of the Hindu Maharajas and the Muslim Nawabs. Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province and Kashmir were annexed after the Second Anglo-Sikh War in 1849. However, Kashmir was immediately sold under the Treaty of Amritsar in 1850 to the Drogma dynasty of Jammu and therefore became a princely state. The border dispute between Nepal and British India, which sharpened after 1801, had caused the Anglo-Nepalese War of 1814-16 and brought the Gurkhas under British influence. In 1854, Berar was annexed and the state of Uday was added 2 years later. For practical purposes, the company was the government of much of India. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 occurred as the result of an accumulation of factors over time rather than just a single event. The sepoys were local soldiers, the majority Hindu or Muslim, that was recruited into the company's army. Just before the rebellion, there were over 300,000 sepoys in the army compared to about 50,000 British soldiers. The forces were divided into 3 presidential armies, Bombay, Madras and Bengal. The Bengal Army recruited higher castes such as Rajputs and Brahmins, mostly from the Adwadi near Lucknow and the Bihar regions, and even restricted the enlistment of lower castes in 1855. In contrast, the Madras Army and Bombay Army were more localised, caste-neutral armies that, quote, did not prefer high caste men, end quote. The domination of higher castes in the Bengal Army had been blamed in part for initial mutinies that led to the rebellion. In fact, the role of the caste had become so important that the men were no longer, quote, selected on the account of the most important quantities in a soldier, i.e. physical fitness, willingness and strength, docility and courage, but it became because he belonged to a certain caste or sect, end quote. In 1772, when Warren Hastings was appointed India's first Governor-General, one of his first undertakings was the rapid expansion of the company's army. Since the sepoys from Bengal, many of whom had fought for the company in the battles of Plassey and Buxar, were now suspect in British eyes. Hastings recruited farther west from the high caste rural Rajputs and Brahmins of Adwa and Bihar, a practice that continued for the next 75 years. However, in order to forestall any social friction, the company also took pains to adapt its military practices to the requirements of their religious rituals. Consequently, the soldiers dined in separate facilities, In addition, overseas service considered polluting to their caste was not required of them, and the army soon came officially recognise Hindus' festivals. The encouragement of high caste ritual statues, however, felt the government vulnerable to protest, even mutiny, whenever the sepoys detected infringement of their prerogatives. It has been suggested that after the annexation of Uda of the East India Company in 1856, many sepoys were disquieted both from losing their perquisites as landed gentry in the Urdu courts and from an anticipation of any increased land revenue payments that the annexation might bring about. Others have stressed that by 1857, some Indian soldiers, reading the presence of missionaries as a sign of official intent, were convinced that the company were masquerading and masterminding a mass conversion of Hindus and Muslims in Christianity. Although earlier in the 1830s, evangelists such as William Carey and William Wilberforce had successfully clamoured for the passage of social reform such as the abolition of sati and allowing the marriage of Hindu widows, there was little evidence that sepoys' allegiance was affected by this. Changes in the terms of their professional service may have created resentment at the extent of the East India Company's jurisdiction expansion. Within victories in wars or the annexation, the soldiers are now not only expected to serve less familiar regions, such as the Burma region during the Anglo-Burmese War in 1856, but also do without foreign service. Remuneration had previously been their due. Another financial grievance stemmed from the General Service Act, which denied retired sepoys a pension. Whilst this only applied to new recruits, it was suspected that it would also apply to those already in service. In addition, the Bengal Army was paid less than the Madras and Bombay armies, which compounded the fears over pensions. The major cause of this resentment arose 10 months prior to the outbreak of the rebellion. The General Service Enlistment Act of 25th of July 1856. As noted above, men of the Bengal Army had been exempt from overseas service. Specifically, they were enlisted only for service in the territories which they could march. Governor-General Lord Dalhousie saw this as an anomaly, since all sepoys, the Madras and Bombay armies plus 6 general service battalions of the Bengal Army had accepted an obligation to serve overseas if required. As a result, the burden of providing contingents for active service in Burma, readily assembled only by sea, and China, had fallen disproportionately onto the 2 smaller presidential armies. As signed into effect by Lord Canning, House's successor as Governor-General, the Act required only new recruits of the Bengal Army to accept a commitment for general, that is, overseas service. However, serving high caste sepoys were fearful that it would be eventually extended to them, as well as preventing sons following fathers into an army with a strong tradition of family service history. There was also grievances over the issue of promotion based on seniority. This, as well as increasing the number of European officers in the battalions, made the promotion of a slow progress, and many Indian officers did not reach commission rank until they were too old to be affected. The final spark was provided by the ammunition for the new pattern 1853 Enfield rifle. These rifles had a tighter fit and used paper cartridges that became pre-greased. To load the rifle, sepoys had to bite the cartridge open to release the powder. The grease used on these cartridges included tallow derived from beef, which would be offensive to Hindus, or lard derived from pork, which would be offensive to Muslims. At least one company official pointed out the difficulties that may cause. Quote, "Unless it isn't proven that the grease employed in these cartridges is not of a nature to offend or interfere with the prejudices of the caste, it will be expedient not to issue them for test to native courts, unquote. However, in August 1856, grease cartridges were initiated at Fort William, Calcutta, following a British design. The grease used included tallow supplied by the Indian firm of Gardiner, Boringi and Co. By January, the rumours were abroad that the Enfield cartridges were greased with animal fat. Company officers became aware of these rumours through reports of an altercation between high-caste sepoys and a low-caste labourer at Dum Dum. The labourer had taunted the sepoy that by biting the cartridge he himself lost caste, although at this time such cartridges had been issued only in Meerut and not at Dum Dum. Therefore, had been rumours that the British sought to destroy the religions of the Indian people, and forcing the native soldier to break their sacred code would certainly added to the rumour, as it apparently did. The company were quick to reverse the effects of this policy in the hope that the Indians would be quelled. On the 27th of January, Colonel Richard Birch, the military secretary, ordered that all cartridges issued from the depots were to be free from grease, and that the sepoys could grease them themselves using whatever mixture, quote, they may prefer, unquote. A modification was also made to the drill for the loading of that cartridge, so that it was torn with the hands and not bitten. This, however, merely caused many to suppose and to be convinced that the rumours were true and their fears were justified. Additional rumours started that the paper in the new cartridges, which was glazed and stiffened than the previous used paper, were impregnated with grease. Though the British made the attempt to reverse what had been done, the Indians were convinced the British no longer had no other desire than to destroy their way of life. The civilian rebellion was more multivarious in origin. The rebellion consisted of three groups: the feudal nobility, rural landowners called Talguetars, and the peasants. The nobility, many of whom lost titles and domains under the doctrine of lapse, which refused to recognise the adopted children or princesses of legal heirs, felt that the company had interfered with the traditional system of inheritance. Rebel leaders such as Nana Sahib and the Rani of Jananasi belonged to the group. The latter, for example, was prepared to accept East Indian Company supremacy if her adopted son was recognised as her late husband's heir. In other areas of central India, such as Indore and Sagar, where such loss of privilege had not occurred yet, the prince remained loyal to the company even in areas where the sepoys had rebelled. The second group, the Talakadars, had lost half their landed estate to peasant farmers as a result of the land reforms that came in the wake of annexation of Uda. The rebellion gained ground. The Talukus quickly reoccupied the lands they had lost, and paradoxically, in part of the ties of kinship and federal loyalty, did not experience significant opposition from the peasant farmers, many of whom joined the rebellion, to the great dismay of the British. It was also suggested that heavy land revenue assessments in some areas by the British resulted in many landowner families either losing their land or going into great debt with money lenders, and providing ultimately a reason to rebel. Money lenders, in addition to the company, were particularly objective to the rebels' animosity. The civilian rebellion was highly uneven in its geographic distribution. Even in areas of north-central India, there was no longer under British control. For example, the relatively prosperous Muzaffarnagar district, a beneficiary of company irrigation scheme, and next door to Meerut, where the upheaval began, stayed mostly calm throughout. Much of the resistance to the company came from the old aristocracy, who were seeing their power steadily eroded. The company had annexed several states under the doctrine of lapse, according to which land belonging to the federal ruler began the property of the East Indian Company if on his death the ruler did not leave a male heir through natural process. Long been the custom for the childless landowner to adopt an heir, but the East Indian Company ignored this tradition. Nobility, feudal landholders and the royal armies found that these unemployed and humiliated due to company expansionism. Even the jewels of the royal family of Nagpur were publicly auctioned in Calcutta, a move that was seen as a sign of abject disrespect by the remnants of the Indian aristocracy. Lord Dalhousie, the Governor-General of India, had asked the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar and its successor to leave the Red Fort, the palace in Delhi. Later, Lord Canning, the next Governor-General of India, announced in 1856 that Bahadur Shah's successor would not even be allowed to use the title of king. Such discourtesies were resented by the deposed Indian rulers. Utilitarian and evangelical inspired social reform, including the abolition of sati and legalization of widow remarriage, were considered by many, especially the British themselves, to have caused suspicion that Indian religious traditions were being interfered with the ultimate aim of conversion. Recent historians, including Chris Bailey, have preferred to frame this as a clash of knowledges, with proclamations from religious authorities before the result and testimony after it, including such issues as the insults of women, the rise of low persons under British tutelage, and the population caused by Western medicine, and persecuting and ignoring of traditional astrological authorities. European run schools were also a problem. According to recorded testimonies, anger had spread because of stories that mathematics was replaced in religious instruction. Stories were chosen that would bring contempt upon Indian religions, and because your children were exposed to moral dangers by education. The justice system was considered to be inherently unfair to the Indians. The official blue books, East Indian Torture, 1855 to 1857, laid before the House of Commons during the sessions of 1856 and 57, which revealed that company officers were allowed to extend a series of appeals if convicted or accused of brutally or crimes against Indians. It was also revealed that the officers had freedom to collect revenue via extortion in many cases. The economic policies of the East Indian Company were also resented by many Indians. Each of the three presidencies into which the East Indian Company divided India for administration purposes maintained their own armies. Of these armies, the Bengal Presidency was the largest. Unlike the other two, it recruited heavily from among high caste Hindus and comparatively wealthy Muslims. The Muslims formed a larger percentage of the irregular units within the Bengal Army, whilst Hindus were mainly to be found in irregular units. The sepoys, the native Indian soldiers, were therefore affected to a large degree by the concerns of landholding and traditional members of the Indian society. In the early years of the company rule, they tolerated and even encouraged the caste privileges and customs within the Bengal Army, which recruited its regular soldiers almost exclusively amongst the landowning Brahmins and the Rajputs of the Ganges Valley. By the time the customs and privileges came to be threatened by modernizing regimes in Calcutta from the 1840s onwards, the sepoys had become accustomed to very high ritual status and were extremely sensitive to suggestions that their caste might be polluted. Sepoys also gradually became dissatisfied with the various other aspects of army life. Their pay was relatively low, and after Adwa and the Punjab were annexed, the soldiers no longer received extra pay, bata or blata, for their services there because they were no longer considered foreign missions. The junior European soldiers and officers were increasingly estranged from their soldiers, in many cases threatening them as their racial inferiors. Officers of evangelical persuasion and of the company's army, such as Herbert Edwards and Colonel S.G. Weller of the 34th Bengal Infantry, are taken to preaching to their sepoys in the hope of converting them to Christianity. In 1856, a new Enlistment Act was introduced by the company, which in theory made every unit in the Bengal Army liable to service overseas. Although it only intended to apply to new recruits, the sepoys feared that the act might be applied retrospectively to them as well. It was argued that the high-caste Hindus who travelled in the cramped, squalid conditions of the troopship would find it impossible to avoid losing caste through ritual pollution. Several months of increasing tensions, coupled with various incidents, preceded the actual rebellion. On the 26th of February 1857, the 19th Bengal Native Army Regiment became concerned that new cartridges they had been issued with were wrapped in paper grease with cow and pig fat, which had to be opened by mouth, thus affecting their religious sensibilities. Their colonel confronted them, supported by artillery and cavalry, on the parade ground, but after some negotiation withdrew the artillery and cancelled next morning's parade. On the 29th of March 1857, at the Barakpur Nabarak Spur parade ground near Calcutta, now Karachi, 29-year-old Mangal Padley of the 34th Bengal Native Infantry, angered by the recent actions of the East Indian Company, declared that he would rebel against his commanders. Informed about Pendley's apparently drug-induced behaviour, Sergeant Major James Hewson went to investigate, only to have Pendley shoot at him. Henson raised the alarm. When his adjacent Lieutenant Henry Bow came out to investigate the unrest, Paddy opened fire but hit Ben-Hur's horse instead. General John Hersey came out to see him on the parade ground and claimed later that Mangal Pandey was some kind of religious frenzy. He ordered the Indian commander of the quarter guard, Jamadi Ishwari Prasad, to arrest the Bengal Pandey, but the Jamandar refused. The quartermaster guarded the other sepoys present, with the single exception of a soldier called Shikha Palutu, drew back from the restraint and arrested Bengal Pendley. Sheikh Palutu restrained Pendley from continuing his attack. After failing to incite his comrades into open and active rebellion, Mangal Pandey tried to take his own life by placing his musket to his chest and pulling the trigger with his toe. He only managed to wound himself and he was court-martialed on the 6th of April. He was hanged on the 8th. The Jahamadi Ishari Prasad was sentenced to death and hanged on the 22nd of April. The regiment was disbanded and stripped of their uniforms because it was felt they harboured ill feeling towards their superiors, particularly after this incident. Shakir Palutu was promoted to the rank of Jamada in the Bengal Army. Sepoys in other regiments throughout this thought this was a very harsh punishment. The show of disgrace while this disbanding contributed to the extent of the rebellion in view of some historians, as disgruntled ex-sepoys returned home to Awada with a desire to inflict revenge and when the opportunity arose. During April there was unrest and fires at Agra, Al-Haladbab and Abala. At Abala in particular, with a large military cantonment with several units had been collected for the annual musketry practice. It was clear to General Anderson, Commander-in-Chief of the Bengal Army, that some sort of riot over the cartridges were imminent. Despite the obligations of the civilian Governor General Staff, he agreed to postpone the military practice and allow a new drill by which the soldiers tore the cartridges with their fingers rather than their teeth. However, he issued no general orders making this standard practice throughout the Bengal Army, and rather than remain at Ambala to diffuse overall potential trouble, he then proceeded to Simla. the cool hill station where many high officials spent the summer. Although there was no open revolt at Ambala, there was widespread arson during late April. Barrack buildings, especially those belonging to soldiers who used their Enfield cartridges, and European officers' bungalows were set on fire. At Meerut, there was another large military encampment where 2,357 Indian sepoys and 2,038 British soldiers were stationed, with 12 British manned guns. The station held one of the largest concentrations of British troops in India and was later to be cited as evidence the original uprising was spontaneous rather than a pre-planned plot. Although the general state of unrest within the Bengal Army was well known, on the 24th of April, Lieutenant Colonel George Carmichael Smythe, the unsympathetic commanding officer of the 3rd Bengal Light Cavalry, ordered 90 of his men to parade and perform firing drills. All except 5 men on parade refused to accept their cartridges. On the 9th of May, the remaining 85 men were court-martialed and most were sentenced to 10 years imprisonment with hard labour. 11 comparatively young soldiers were given 5 years imprisonment. The entire garrison was paraded and watched as the condemned men were stripped of their uniforms and placed in shackles. As they marched off to jail, the condemned soldiers berated their comrades for failing to support them. The next day was Sunday, the Christian day of rest and worship. Some Indian soldiers were warned off-duty junior European officers, including Hugh Gough, then a lieutenant of horse, that the plan was afoot to release the imprisoned soldiers by force, but the senior officer to whom this was reported in turn took no action. There was also unrest in the city of Meerut itself, with angry protests in the bazaar and some buildings being set fire. In the evening, most European soldiers were prepared to attend church, while many of the European soldiers were off duty and had gone into canteens or into bazaars in Meerut. The Indian troops led by the 3rd Cavalry broke into revolt. European junior officers who attempted to quell the first outbreaks were killed by their own men. European officers and civilians quartered were attacked, and 4 civilian men, 8 women and 8 children were killed. Crowds in the bazaar attacked the off-duty soldiers there. About 50 Indian civilians, some of whom were officer servants who tried to defend or conceal their employers, were also killed by the sepoys. Within the city of Meerut, the Kotwal, holder of the fort, Dan Singh Gurjar, opened the gate of the jail. A total of about 50 European men, including soldiers, women and children, were killed in Meerut by spouses and crowds. On the evening of the 10th of May, the sepoys freed their 85 imprisoned comrades from the jail, along with 800 other prisoners made up of debtors and criminals. Some sepoys, especially from the 11th Bengal Native Infantry, escorted trusted British officers and women and children safely before joining the result. Some officers and their families escaped to Rampur, where they found refuge within the Nawabs. The senior company officers, in particular Major General Hewitt, the commander of the division, who was nearly 70 years of age and in poor health, were slow to react. The British troops, mainly the 1st Battalion of the 60th Rifles, the 6th Dragoon Guards and 2 European manned batteries of the Bengal Artillery, rallied but received no orders to encourage or engage the rebellious sepoys and could only guard their own headquarters and armories. On the following morning, they prepared to attack. They found Meerut was quiet and that the rebels had marched off to Delhi. The British historian Philip Mason notes that it is inevitable that most of the sepoys and sawars from the Meerut should have made the Delhi on the night of the 10th of May. It was a strong-walled city located only 40 miles away. It was the ancient capital and the present seat of the Mughal Emperor, and finally there was no British troops in garrison there. by contrast with the relatively strong concentration in Meerut. What no one could have anticipated was that no effort was made to pursue them. Early on the 11th of May, the first parties of the 3rd Cavalry reached Delhi. From beneath the windows of the king's apartment in the palace, they called on him to acknowledge and lead them. Bandar Singh did nothing at this point, apparently treating the sepoys as ordinary petitioners, but others in the palace were quick to join the revolt. During the day, the revolt spread. Gunjars from Kadwala, led by Chaudhry Daya Ram, destroyed the house of chief magistrates, the appealers Metcalfe. European officials and dependents, Indian Christians and shopkeepers within the city were killed, some by sepoys and others by crowds of rioters. There were 3 battalions of the Bengal native infantry stationed in or near the city. Some detachments quickly joined the rebellion, while others held back but also refused to obey orders to take action against the rebels. In the afternoon, a violent explosion in the city was heard from several miles. Fearing that the arsenal, which contained large stocks of arms and ammunition, would fall intact into the rebel hands, the 9 British ordnance officers there had opened fire on the sepoys, including the men of their own guard. When resistance appeared hopeless, they blew up the arsenal. Although 6 of the 9 officers survived, the blast killed many in the streets and nearby houses and other buildings. The news of the events finally tipped the sepoys stationed around Delhi into open rebellion. The sepoys were later able to salvage at least some arms from the arsenal, and a magazine 2 miles outside of Delhi containing up to 3,000 barrels of gunpowder were captured without resistance. Many fugitive European soldiers, officers and civilians had congregated to the Flagstaff Tower on the ridge north of Delhi, where telegraph operators were sending news of the events to other British stations. When it became clear that help was expected from Meerut was not coming, they made their way in carriages to Canal. Those that became separated from the main body or could not reach the Flagstaff Tower also set out for Canal on foot. Some were helped by villagers on the way, others were robbed and murdered. The next day, Bandar Shah held the first formal court for many years. It was attended by many excited or unruly sepoys. The king was alarmed by the turn events had taken, but eventually accepted the sepoys' allegiance and agreed to give his countenance to the rebellion. On the 16th of May, up to 50 Europeans who had been held previously prisoner in the palace or had been discovered hiding in the city were said to have been killed by some of the king's servants under a papal tree in a courtyard outside the palace. The news of the events at Delhi spread rapidly, provoking uprising among sepoys and disturbances in many districts. In many cases, it was the behaviour of the British military and civilian authorities themselves which led to the disorder. Learning of the fall of Delhi by telegraph, many company administrators hastened to remove themselves, their families and servants to places of safety. At Agra, 160 miles away from Delhi, no less than 6,000 assorted non-combatants converged on the fort. The haste in which many civilians left their post encouraged rebellions in the areas they left, although others remained at their post until it was clearly impossible to maintain any sort of order. Several were murdered by rebels or lawless gangs. The military authorities also reacted to disjointed manners. Some officers trusted their sepoys, but others tended to disarm them to forestall any potential uprising. At Benares and Allahabad, this disarming was bungled and also leading to local social revolts. Although the rebellion became widespread, there was little unity among the rebels. While Bahadur Singh Zafar was restored to the imperial throne, there was a faction that wanted the Marathi rulers to be enthroned also, and the Awadis wanted to retain their powers that their Nawabs used to have. There were calls from jihad by Muslim leaders like Maulana Falaz el-Haq Karahandi and Milian Mahsuda Shah, which was taken up by Muslims, particularly artisans, which caused the British to think that the Muslims were the main force behind this event. The Mongol Emperor Bahadur Shah resisted these calls for the jihad because it was being suggested he feared the outbreaks of communal violence. In Hawadi, Sunni Muslims did not want to see a return to the Shiite rule, so they often refused to join what they perceived to be a Shia rebellion. However, some Muslims, like the Aga Khan, supported the British. The British rewarded him by formally recognising his title. Although most of the rebellious sepoys in Delhi were Hindus, a significant proportion of the insurgents were Muslims. The proportion of Ghazali grew to be quite a quarter of the local fighting force by the end of the siege, and included a regiment of suicide Gihas from Gwalior who had voted never to eat again and to fight until they met certain death at the hands of the British troops. In Thanabawan, the Sunnis declared the Hija Ahmadullah their Amir. In May 1857, the Battle of Shamli took place between the forces of Haji Indabullah and the British. The Sikhs and the Pathans of the Punjab and northwest frontier provinces supported the British and helped in the recapture of Delhi. Historian John Harris has asserted that the Sikhs wanted to avenge the annexation of the Sikh Empire 8 years earlier by the company with the help of the Punjabis, Easterners. Iranis and those of the United Provinces of Agra and Ouda had formed part of the East India Company's armies in the First and Second Anglo-Sikh Wars. He also suggested that Sikhs felt insulated by the attitude of sepoys who, in their view, had only beaten the Khalasi with British help. They resented and despised them far more than they did the British. The Sikhs feared reinstalment of Mongol rule in northern India, as the Sikhs were persecuted heavily by the Mongol dynasty and feared Mongol rule. According to Hugh K. Travakis, Sikh support for the British resulted from grievances surrounding the sepoys' perceived conduct during and after the Anglo-Sikh Wars. Firstly, many Sikhs resented that Hindustanis in the service of the Sikh state had been foremost in urging the wars which lost them their independence. Sikh soldiers also recalled the bloodless battles of the war. Chinwala and Firozonshi was won by British troops, and they believed that the Hindustani sepoys had refused to meet them in battle. These feelings were compounded within Hindustan sepoys, who were assigned a very visible role as garrison troops in Punjab and awarded profit-making civil posts in Punjab. In 1857, the Bengal Army had 86,000 men, of which 12,000 were European, 16,000 Sikh, and 1,500 Gurkha soldiers out of a total of the three Indian armies, 311,000 native soldiers, and 40,160 European soldiers, as well as 5,362 officers. 54 of the Bengal Army's 75 regular native infantry regiments rebelled, although some were immediately destroyed or broke up by their sepoys drifting away to their homes. A number of the remaining 21 regiments were disarmed or disbanded to prevent or forestall rebellion. In total, only 12 of the original Bengal native infantry regiments survived to pass into the new Indian Army. All 10 of the Bengal light cavalry regiments rebelled. The Bengal Army also included 29 irregular cavalry and 42 irregular infantry regiments. These included the substantial contingent from recently annexed state of Adwa, which rebelled en masse. Another large contingent from Gwalior also rebelled, even though the state's regular remained allied to the British. The remainder of the irregular units were raised from a wide variety of sources and were less affected by the concern of mainstream Indian society. 3 bodies in particular actively supported the company: 3 Gurkha and 5 of the 6 Sikh infantry units and the 6 infantry and 6 cavalry units of the recently raised Punjab irregular force. On April 1858, the number of Indian soldiers in the Bengal Army loyal to the company were 8,053. This total included a large number of soldiers hastily raised in the Punjab and northwest frontier after the outbreak of the rebellion. The Bombay Army had 3 mutinies on its 29th regiments, while the Madras Army had no mutinies, though elements of its 52 regiments refused to volunteer for service in Bengal. Most of the southern Indian remained passive, with only sporadic and haphazard outbreaks of violence. Most of the states did not take part in the war, as many parts of the rebellions were ruled by the Nizams or the Mysore royalty and were thus not directly under British rule. Bahadur Singh Zahar was proclaimed the Emperor of the whole of India. Most contemporary and modern accounts suggest that he was coerced by the sepoys and his couriers to sign the proclamation against his will. In spite of the significant loss of power that the Mughal dynasty had suffered in the preceding centuries, there still carried great prestige to the name across northern India. The civilian nobility and other dignitaries took the oath of allegiance to the emperor. The British would have long ceased to take authority of the Mughal emperor seriously, were astonished at how ordinary people responded to the Tsar's call for war. The emperor issued coins in his name, one of the oldest ways of asserting imperial status, and his name was added to the acceptance by Muslims that their king. This proclamation, however, turned the Sikhs or Punjab away from the rebellion, as they did not want to return to Islamic rule, having fought many wars against the Mughal rulers. The province of Bengal was largely quiet throughout the entire period. Initially, the Indian soldiers were able to significantly push back the company forces and captured several important towns in Haryana, Bihar, central provinces and United Provinces. When the European troops were reinforced and began to counterattack, the sepoys who mutinied were especially handicapped by their lack of centralized command and control system. Although they produced some natural leaders such as Barak Khan, whom the emperor had later nominated as commander-in-chief after his son Muzaffar Mughal proved ineffective, for the most part they were forced to look for leadership to Rajas and princes. Some of those were proven dedicated leaders, but others were self-interested or inept. In the countryside around Meerut, a general Gurkha uprising posed the largest threat to the British. In Pakistan near Meerut, Gurkhas declared Kamranji Kadam Singh their leader and expelled company police. Kadam Singh Gurkha led a large army of men. Estimates vary from around 2,000 to 10,000. Bulgadashah and Bunjani also came under control of Gurkhas under leaders of Walid Khan and Maho Singh respectively. Contemporary reports suggest that nearly all Madhya villages in the area between Meerut and Delhi participated in the resulting revolt. In some cases accompanied by mutineering sepoys from Jalandhar. It was not until late July that, with the help of the Jats of the area, the British managed to regain control of the area. The Imperial Gazette of India states that although the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the mergers into Rajhas, the Muslim Jatpats, proved the most irreconcilable enemies of the British in the Gangetic area. Mufti Nazaruddin, renowned scholar of Rawani issued a fatwa against the British forces and called upon the local population to support the forces of Rai Tula Ram. Many people were killed in the fight at Narawar, Nashipur. After the defeat of Rai Tula Ram on the 6th of November 1857, Mufti Nazaruddin was arrested and his brother Mufti Yaqinuddin and brother-in-law Abdur Rahman alias Nabi Bakshish were arrested in Tura. They were taken to Delhi and hanged. Having lost the fight at Narishpur, Rai Tula Ram and Pra Sikh Yadav went to obtain arms from Russia, which had just been engaged against the British in the Crimea War. The British were slow to strike back at first. It took time for troops stationed in Britain to make their way to India by sea, although some regiments moved overland through Persia from the Crimea War, and some regiments already en route to China were diverted to India. It took time to organise the European troops already in India into field forces, but eventually 2 columns left Meerut in Simla. They proceeded slowly towards Delhi and fought, killed and hanged numerous Indians along the way. 2 months after the first outbreak of rebellion at Meerut, the 2 forces met near Canal. The combined forces, which included 2 Gurkha units serving in the Bengal Army under contract from the Kingdom of Nepal, fought the main army of the rebels at Baladi and Kanchara and drove them back to Delhi. The company established a base on the Delhi Ridge and to the north of the city, and the siege of Delhi began. The siege lasted roughly from the 1st of July to the 21st of September. However, the encirclement was hardly complete, and for much of the siege the company forces were outnumbered. It often seemed that it was the company forces, not Delhi, that was under siege, as the rebels could easily receive resources and reinforcements. For several weeks it seemed that disease, exhaustion and continuous sorties by the rebels from Delhi would force the company forces to withdraw, but outbreaks of rebellion in the Punjab were forestalled or suppressed, allowing the Punjab movable column of British, Sikh and Pachu soldiers under John Nicholson to reinforce the besiegers on the ridge on the 14th of August. On the 30th of August, the rebels offered terms which were refused. An eagerly awaited heavy siege train joined the besieger force, and from the 7th of September the siege guns battered breaches into the walls and silenced the rebel artillery. An attempt to storm the city through the breaches and the Kashmiri Gate was launched on the 14th of September. The attacks gained a foothold within the city but suffered heavy casualties, including John Nicholson. The British commander wished to withdraw but was persuaded to hold on by his junior officers. After a week of street fighting, the British reached the Red Fort. Budhar Singh had already fled to Maihan's tomb. The British had retaken the city. The troops of the besieging force proceeded to loot and pillage the city. A large number of the civilians were killed in retaliation for the Europeans and Indian civilians that had been killed by the rebel sepoys. During the street fighting, artillery had been set up on the main mosque in the city, and the neighbourhoods within range were bombarded. These included the homes of the Muslim nobility from all over India and contained innumerable cultural, artistic, literary and monetary riches. The British soon arrested Budhar Singh, and the next day British officer William Hodson shot his sons Mirza Mungur, Mirza Kazir, Sultan and grandson Mirza Abdur Baker under his own authority at the Kawuni Darwazi, the Bloody Gate near Delhi Gate. On hearing the news, Zafar reacted with shock silence, while his wife Zinet Mahar was happy as she believed her son was now in his heir. Soon after the fall of Delhi, the Victoria attackers organised a column which relieved another besieged company force in Agra, then pressed on to Kanpur, which had been recently captured. This gave the company forces a continuous, although still tenuous, line of communication from the east to India. This is the end of part 1, the brief history podcast, Indian Mutiny. Part 2 will follow shortly. As always, the success of any new podcast relies on the listeners. Please share, tell your friends, like us on social networks such as Facebook and Twitter, and listen again for part 2. Thank you. As always, this has been narrated and researched, written by Andrew Knight, music and editing by Harry Edmondson. Please check out the podcast notes for further information.
Get excited, America, because Dunkin' Go-Tos are here. Double deals on breakfast sandwiches, made for go-getters. Why 2 breakfast sandwiches? Well, maybe a coworker eats one when you're not looking. Or maybe an eagle swoops down and steals one. Or maybe you're just double hungry. Whatever the reason, come into Dunkin' Donuts now and get 2 egg and cheese wake-up wraps for $2, 2 egg and cheese English muffins for $3, or 2 bacon, egg, and cheese croissants for $5. America runs on Dunkin'. Participation may vary. Limited time offer. Restrictions apply.